The cold bit the soft skin right behind my ears. It was October, not the crisp, beautiful October they put on greeting cards, but the damp, gray Ohio kind, where the sky felt like wet cement pressing down on your shoulders. David's car, a pristine white Lexus SUV that smelled like new money and synthetic leather, was idling 2 spaces past the yellow curb, exactly where the church sign said, "Emergency vehicles only." David always parked there. He didn't follow rules unless they benefited his image. I sat in my battered 2012 Subaru, the heater rattling on high, trying to coax Mark, my 7-year-old, to move. "Mark, honey," the door. He was a statue. His small face, usually animated by stories of space aliens and Minecraft, was flat, pressed against the window. He was watching the other side of the parking lot. He wasn't watching the church doors. He was watching David. David, my ex-husband, the man who hadn't paid full child support in 4 months but drove a brand new Lexus, was already out of his car. He was wearing his Sunday costume, perfectly tailored charcoal slacks, a crisp, blindingly white shirt, and a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He smelled faintly of expensive soap and the kind of cologne men wear when they want you to think they're trustworthy investors. He looked like a man about to deliver a sermon, not a man dropping off his own kids and picking up his new set of obligations. Our daughter, Chloe, 10, slid out of the Subaru first. She was all sharp angles and dramatic sighs lately, navigating the world with the studied indifference only a 5th grader can master. She didn't look at David. She looked at her shoes, the laces double knotted the way I taught her, practical and tight. She didn't want to need him. She was trying desperately to look like she didn't care that this ritual happened every week. "Keys, Chloe," I murmured, handing her the brown paper bag containing 2 stale peanut butter sandwiches and a thermos of lukewarm chocolate milk, in case they run late for youth group again. She nodded, took the bag, and walked toward the sprawling glass entrance of the First Community Church, which was built to look vaguely like a contemporary art museum, all angles and exposed wood beams. She walked slowly, calculating the exact moment David would look her way. David, meanwhile, was executing the crucial first step of his weekly performance, the greeting. He wasn't greeting Chloe. He was greeting the pastor's wife, Sarah, who had just appeared on the wide concrete steps, surrounded by a flock of women in sensible sweaters and sensible shoes, all clutching Bibles and styrofoam cups. Sarah was the queen of the church social circuit. Getting Sarah's approval was like getting a gold star in the Good Christian Husband competition. He smiled, not the strained, slightly pained smile he gave the bank teller or the mechanic. This was the full David smile. Teeth, crinkled eyes, the kind of smile that made his jaw look strong and honest. He put one hand flat on his chest, a subtle, theatrical gesture suggesting deep sincerity and humble devotion. Mark finally unbuckled his seatbelt. The cheap plastic click echoed loud in the strained silence of the car. "Go on, bud," I whispered. My throat felt thick, coated in grit. He opened the door just enough to slide out, keeping the width between the Subaru and the Lexus maximized. He kept his head down. I watched him walk the 10 feet toward his father. 10 feet. A lifetime. David didn't move toward him. David stayed put, talking to Sarah and the cluster of women. He was talking about the community outreach project, something he hadn't actually participated in, but something he was clearly funding heavily enough to gain social capital. Mark stopped 2 feet away from the back of the Lexus. He shuffled his feet on the asphalt. The asphalt was still black and shiny from the morning rain. Chloe paused near the glass doors, waiting for her brother. Her posture was stiff, an accusation in itself. Finally, David turned. He didn't look down at Mark. He looked over. Mark, calculating the distance to the church entrance. He put a hand on Mark's head. A quick, possessive pat, not a loving touch. A check mark. Yep, the biological offspring have been delivered. Go on in, kids. Sunday school starts promptly. Tell Mrs. Henderson I said hello. His voice was loud, booming, professional. It was the voice he used when he was closing a deal, not when he was addressing his own son. He didn't ask if Mark had done his homework. He didn't ask if Chloe was still worried about the math test. He didn't ask how they felt about spending the afternoon with their father's sister instead of him, because he had mandatory golf. Mark nodded, his eyes still glued to the ground. He turned and followed Chloe inside. They disappeared into the bright, warm light of the foyer, becoming two more small, anonymous figures absorbed by the vast, moralizing machine that was First Community Church. David watched them go for precisely 2 seconds. Then he spun back around, his smile instantly snapping back into place, brighter than before, because now the real show was starting. His fiancée, Beth, appeared. She wasn't wearing the Sunday uniform. She was wearing a perfectly tailored wool coat, the color of expensive cream, and knee-high leather boots that gleamed in the weak morning light. She looked effortlessly elegant. She was carrying 2 small matching backpacks, forest green with little personalized patches. Her children, the twins, Mason and Mia, emerged from the passenger side of the Lexus. They were tiny, blonde, and immaculate. They were giggling. David's whole body language shifted. The rigid control melted away. He became buoyant. Super Dad! He knelt, right there in the parking lot, ignoring the wet asphalt, ignoring the fact that his $500 pants were inches from the ground. He knelt and opened his arms wide. Mason and Mia ran into him. He scooped them up, one in each arm, hoisting them high. The sound of their laughter, high-pitched and genuine, drifted across the blacktop and punched me directly in the gut. It was a clean, sharp, agonizing sound. He stood up, one hand resting protectively on Mia's back, the other hand holding Mason's shoulder. He was talking softly to Beth, his head bowed conspiratorially. He looked like the picture of wholesome, committed fatherhood, the kind of man who would volunteer to coach soccer and build birdhouses and teach Sunday school. He was doing all this 10 feet from where he had just dismissed his own flesh and blood, with a perfunctory pat on the head. I watched until they were all safely inside the polished double doors. David, Beth, and the 2 immaculate stepchildren, melting seamlessly into the architecture of virtue. My fingers were digging crescent shapes into the leather of the steering wheel. The leather was cheap, cracked along the top. Breathe, Kristen. I put the car in reverse. The noise of the Subaru's engine, old and struggling, felt coarse against the sanctified silence of the parking lot. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just backed out, tires crunching slightly on the gravel shoulder, and aimed the car west, away from God, away from David, away from the lie. The drive home took 12 minutes exactly. Every Sunday, 12 minutes of silence. It was a silence filled with ghosts. The ghosts of the life we were supposed to have. The ghosts of our shared mortgage. The ghosts of the promises David had made when Mark was born. Pink and screaming and needing a father who would stay. I pulled into the driveway of the split-level ranch we could barely afford anymore. The house was beige. Everything about our post-David life felt beige and slightly used. I killed the engine. The resulting quiet was so dense it pressed against my eardrums. I sat there for 5 minutes, maybe 10. Time gets slippery when you're doing nothing but holding your breath. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with wet sand. I hated Sundays. I hated the forced performance. The emotional gymnastics required just to get the kids into the orbit of their father for an hour before he handed them off to his sister for the afternoon, so he could golf with his important clients. I finally dragged myself out of the car. My jeans felt too tight around my waist, the denim digging into the soft flesh that had accumulated since the divorce. Stress weight, comfort food weight. My thin sweater was useless against the cold, and I hugged my arms around my chest, trying to generate internal warmth. The house was cold. I walked straight to the kitchen, avoiding the hallway mirror. I didn't want to see the hollow look in my eyes. I flipped the kettle on. The high, tinny wine was a welcome distraction. I started scrubbing the already clean countertops. Scrubbing things was my new therapy. If I could just scrub hard enough, maybe I could scrape the residue of David's betrayal off the surfaces of my life. He had always hated how I cleaned. Too aggressive, he'd called it. Too much bleach. The irony was thick, metallic on my tongue. He had criticized my cleaning, but his whole life was now a monument built on scrubbing away the evidence of his own poor choices. I scrubbed the granite until my wrist ached. The kettle whistled shrilly. I made strong black coffee and stood by the window, watching the dead leaves swirl in the yard. I went through the Sunday ritual. Pay 3 bills online, only the minimum payment on the Visa this month. Sort the laundry. David's old sweaters left behind went straight into the rag bag. And try not to call my mother and complain. By 2:00 p.m., I was slumped on the couch, wrapped in a threadbare throw blanket, staring at the muted television screen. My head pounded. It wasn't the caffeine. It was the sustained tension held in my neck and shoulders since 7 a.m. Every muscle felt stiff, like old rope. The afternoon crawled. Hours felt like molasses. Every 15 minutes, I checked my phone, just in case David, or more likely his sister Carol, called to say the kids were ready early. They were never ready early. Carol was a saint, but David treated her like free childcare, and she always stretched the visit to the absolute limit. The waiting was the worst. It left me suspended, unable to start anything important, unable to relax, just waiting for the door to burst open and the kids to return, bringing with them the faint, institutional smell of the church basement and the subtle, confusing emotional residue of seeing their father play house with his new family. I managed to nap for 40 minutes, a heavy, shallow sleep full of twitching and anxiety. I woke up with my mouth tasting stale and my jaw locked tight. At 4:45 p.m., the text came. Not from David, from Carol. On the way. ETA 5:05. I sighed. A long, rough sound that snagged in my chest. Ritual complete. Monday was a blur of spreadsheets and conference calls. I work from home, a freelance editor. It's flexible, which is a necessity, but isolating. I spent the day trying to focus on commas and misplaced modifiers, but the image of David kneeling for his stepchildren kept popping into my head, a flash of white shirt against dark asphalt. I kept shaking my head, physically trying to dislodge the memory. Tuesday arrived, gray and unremarkable. I was on a tight deadline. I hadn't showered yet, preferring to stay in my oversized hoodie and sweatpants. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a pencil. I was typing furiously, running on fumes and yesterday's cold coffee, when my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, area code 330, Northeast Ohio. I almost ignored it. Spam calls were relentless, but something made me pause. I grabbed the phone, hitting the green button reluctantly. Hello? My voice was rough, unused. Kristen? Is this Kristen? The voice on the other end was smooth, refined, almost musical. It took me a second to place the cadence, the slight, practiced warmth. Yes, this is Kristen. It's Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. My blood ran cold. Sarah Jenkins. Pastor Tom's wife. The woman David had been charming in the parking lot 2 days ago. The pillar of the community. The woman who ran the women's ministry and coordinated the entire Sunday school curriculum. She was the one David wanted most to impress. Oh, Sarah. Hi, I said, trying to sound normal, professional, like someone who hadn't just been staring at a semicolon for 10 minutes straight. I'm sorry. Is everything okay with Mark or Chloe at youth group? My immediate thought was that one of the kids had misbehaved, and Sarah, being the official church disciplinarian, was calling to register a complaint. My ex-husband would love that. It would give him ammunition for the next custody modification hearing. No, they're fine. They're wonderful children, Kristen. Truly, Sarah said. And there was a pause. A long, awkward, heavy pause that stretched the phone line thin. Sarah Jenkins never stumbled. She spoke in perfectly formed paragraphs. This hesitation was a red flag the size of a billboard. Is there something I can help you with? I prompted, my hand tightening around the pencil holding up my hair. Sarah cleared her throat. It was a delicate sound, rehearsed. Kristen, I apologize for calling you directly at work. I know this is highly unconventional, and perhaps inappropriate, but I felt a conviction. Oh God, a conviction. That was church language for, I saw something scandalous and now I have to involve myself. A conviction about what, Sarah? I tried to keep my voice even, but a low, simmering dread had already started to curl in my stomach. I knew instantly that this had to be about David. It's about David, she confirmed, her voice dropping slightly, becoming hushed, as if someone in her spotless kitchen might overhear her. And about Sunday. I gripped the edge of the desk. He played golf, Sarah. I'm sure he told you that. His sister had the kids. Yes, I know about the golf. That's not precisely what I mean. I'm not calling to question his schedule. Another pause. Kristen, I need to tell you where I was yesterday afternoon. I was at Target, the one off Route 18. Target. My mind immediately conjured up the fluorescent lights, the smell of popcorn and new plastic, the overwhelming aisles. I was there because Tom needed new socks, and frankly, I needed to get away from the house for an hour, she admitted, a rare moment of human vulnerability. Okay, I said. My heart was starting to thump a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. I was near the back, in the toy section. You know, where the oversized plush animals are, near the seasonal displays. I pictured it perfectly. The aisle was always chaotic, stuffed with primary colors and cheap noise. I was looking for a birthday gift for my niece, something small, and I saw David. I closed my eyes. Please don't let him be with Beth, buying her diamonds. He wasn't alone. He was with Mason and Mia. She said the names of his stepchildren, the Immaculate Twins, with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis. Oh, that's fine, Sarah. He spends time with them. I tried to sound nonchalant. This was the routine. Super Dad bonding with the new family. Yes, he was certainly spending time with them. Kristen, he had a cart. And I mean a cart, it was overflowing. He had the biggest Lego castle set they sell, the $200 one, and a motorized scooter for Mason, still in the box. And Mia had convinced him to buy one of those enormous pastel rainbow unicorn plushies. It was almost as tall as she was. I pictured the scene. David, beaming, handing over his platinum card, indulging the children who weren't his, buying their love with enormous, expensive plastic. It was disgusting, but predictable. Sarah, I appreciate the information, but I'm not sure why you felt the need to call me about his shopping habits. I was trying to dismiss her, to put her back in her tidy church box, but she wasn't done. Wait, Kristen, that wasn't all. I was standing maybe 15 feet away, pretending to examine a shelf of board games, when I saw someone else. My breath hitched. Who? Mark. The name, my son's name, hit me like a physical blow. The pencil slipped from my hair, letting the heavy, unwashed strands fall around my face. Mark? I whispered. He was with Carol yesterday, at her house. He wasn't supposed to be at Target. I assume Carol must have brought them along while she ran an errand, perhaps before dropping them off at your house. But yes, it was Mark. He was wearing the blue hoodie. He was standing slightly behind David's cart, near the end cap with the batteries. The blue hoodie, the one I bought 2 sizes too big last winter, hoping he would grow into it. What was he doing? I asked. My voice was suddenly very calm, unnaturally so, the calm that precedes a Category 5 hurricane. He was holding a small box. I think it was a pack of trading cards, maybe Pokemon. He walked up to David very quietly. He tugged gently on David's blazer, right on the elbow. I could see the whole thing playing out in the terrible, bright light of the Target aisle. Mark, small and hesitant, wanting recognition, wanting a piece of the attention David was pouring over the new, improved family. And? I pressed. David was busy helping Mason figure out how to strap the scooter box onto the main cart. He didn't look down right away. Mason was complaining loudly that the box was crushing the unicorn's horn. It was a lot of noise. Just tell me, Sarah. Mark said, Dad, can I get these? They're only $4. I heard him clearly. $4. The trading cards. My focus narrowed down to a single burning point of clarity. $4. David had just put $200 worth of plastic battlements into the cart for Mason. David didn't look at him, Kristen. He kept his attention on Mason, adjusting the scooter box. He didn't even turn his head. Sarah's voice was full of professional sympathy, but I barely registered it. I was watching David in my head, his immaculate blazer, his strong jaw, his focus entirely on the performance of Super Dad. He just waved his hand dismissively. Sarah continued, her words quickening now, as if finally getting the truth out was a relief. He said, Not today, buddy. We're only buying for the twins right now. Put it back. He said it loud enough for me to hear it over the checkout lane music. Then he turned back to Mason and started asking him if he wanted the extra-large helmet too. My hands were shaking, not with rage yet. That was coming later. Right now, it was just the physical reaction to the cold, hard weight of David's indifference. Mark just stood there for a minute, Sarah said, her voice softening, a real human sadness creeping in. He stood perfectly still, clutching that box of cards. Then he just walked slowly back toward the aisle. He put the cards back exactly where he found them. He didn't drop them. He didn't slam them. He just replaced them and walked away, back toward the main aisle, waiting for Carol. The image of Mark, my sensitive, quiet boy, meticulously replacing the $4 cards while his father spent hundreds on the children of a woman he had barely known a year, was a drill bit boring straight into my core. "Kristen, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. My voice was a dry croak. I swallowed hard. The saliva tasted like metal. I know this is incredibly difficult to hear, but I saw it. I saw the look on Mark's face. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. Like he knew what was happening, but he was disappointed anyway. I squeezed my eyes shut. Recognition. That was the word. Mark was recognizing his place in the hierarchy. Invisible. Disposable. David didn't even acknowledge that Mark was his own child, Sarah whispered. He treated him like a stranger asking for spare change. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the car on Sundays. This silence was charged, electric, full of pressure. "I'm sorry, Kristen. I truly am. But I felt I had a moral obligation to share this with you. I thought you should know the difference between the man who serves communion on Sunday and the man I saw yesterday afternoon." She was right. I needed to know. The clean, crisp lines of David's hypocrisy were now perfectly drawn. The Superdad performance was just a thin layer of veneer over pure, narcissistic ice. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. The words tasted flat. "I had to tell Tom," she confessed, her voice lowering further. "I told him everything. He wasn't happy. Not about the money, but about the boy. About Mark. Pastor Tom. The man who preached forgiveness and familial duty." "What did he say?" I asked, my voice barely above a rasp. He said he was going to pray about it, and that sometimes the Holy Spirit guides a man's focus in the most unexpected way. I didn't believe in the Holy Spirit. I believed in spite and revenge and cold, hard reality. "Thank you for the call, Sarah. I need to go." I hung up before she could respond. I didn't say goodbye. I sat there staring at the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. $4. My son had been denied $4 for a pack of trading cards while his father bought a $200 toy for his replacement family. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling violently. The pencil I'd been using snapped in two under the pressure of my grip. The rage finally came. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a cold, creeping fire that started deep in my gut and spread slowly, agonizingly, through my chest and into my throat. It tasted like blood and rust. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a glass from the cupboard. I opened the faucet and filled it quickly, sloppily. I walked back to the living room and hurled the full glass of water, with every ounce of frustration and betrayal I had stored up over the last year, right at the wall. It hit the drywall with a wet, shocking thwack. The water sprayed everywhere, soaking the cheap carpet and leaving a dark, spreading stain on the pale paint. The glass, thankfully, didn't shatter. It just bounced off the stud and clattered harmlessly to the floor. But the sound, the noise, it was real. It was louder than David's perfect smile. I stood in the middle of the wet patch, dripping slightly, breathing hard. I didn't bother to clean it up. I just stared at the stain. I kept staring at the stain until my vision blurred. I was shaking from head to toe. I knew what David was. He was a fraud, a cheap performance in expensive clothes. And now, the one person in the whole church he needed to impress knew it too. I looked at the clock. Sunday was only 5 days away. I wondered what kind of sermon Pastor Tom would preach when the Holy Spirit had a list of specific, itemized receipts from Target. 5 days. 5 days felt like wading through wet cement. I didn't sleep right. I kept waking up, heart hammering, thinking the sun was up. But it was always 3:30 in the morning. The air conditioning unit outside my window kept clicking on and off. Thunk. Whir. Silence. I wanted to smash it. I tried to work. I had 2 contract reports due. The words swam. I'd type a line about quarterly projections, and then my eyes would drift to the coffee stain David made on the wall months ago. It looked like a dark, ugly cloud just above the baseboard. I didn't clean it. I just looked at it. David didn't call. He never called unless he needed something, which, to be clear, meant he never called. The visitation schedule was a joke we stopped telling years ago. The kids were fine. They were used to it. That was the sickening part. They just stopped expecting him. Wednesday, I went to Target, just to get milk. I drove past the toy aisle on purpose. I saw the cheap plastic buckets, the neon green squirt guns, the kind of things David must have been loading into his cart for those stepbrats of his. My stomach turned. I grabbed the milk and bolted. I didn't want to see Sarah, Pastor Tom's wife. I didn't want to confirm anything. I just wanted Sunday to come and be over with. I wanted the lightning to strike and clear the air. Thursday, I stood in the shower for 40 minutes. The hot water ran out. Then it was just cold. I didn't move. I let the cold water beat down on the top of my head. My scalp felt tight. I was practicing my face. I needed to look casual. I needed to look like I didn't know the whole building was about to shake. But how do you look casual when you know the judgment of God is about to be delivered via a middle-aged man in a cheap suit? Friday night, I tried to watch a movie with the kids. They picked some cartoon. The colors were too bright. The laughter tracks were too loud. Every 15 minutes, I'd check the time on my phone. 48 hours. 47 hours. I felt like I was back in labor, waiting for a contraction to peak. Saturday was the worst. The anticipation was thick, like humidity that never broke. I cleaned the house. I scrubbed the bathroom grout until my knees were raw. I reorganized the pantry. Busy hands meant less time for the noise inside my head. The noise was the constant loop. Sarah's wide-eyed, horrified face in aisle 6 of Target. The sight of David, my ex-husband, the man who fathered my children, waving off his own son so he could buy a motorized dinosaur for someone else's kid. It was low, cheap, perfect cruelty. I laid out my clothes for Sunday service. A navy blue dress, practical. It had sleeves. I hated showing my arms. I ironed the collar until it was stiff. I polished my shoes until the leather squeaked. I needed to look respectable. I needed to look like the wronged party, not the crazy one. I didn't sleep Saturday night. I heard every siren, every car that drove by on Elm Street. At 5 a.m., the birds started their racket. I got up, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat staring at the front door. By 9:30 a.m., the children were dressed. They looked miserable. They always hated going to church. They hated sitting still. They hated the scratchy velvet on the pews. David used to tell them, "Smile, boys. We're putting on a show for Jesus." They learned early that church wasn't about faith. It was about performance reviews. We drove the familiar route to First Southern Baptist. The air outside was already thick and hot, promising a miserable 90 degrees by noon. The asphalt shimmered. I pulled into the back parking lot. I avoided the front where David usually parked his leased SUV, the one he claimed he couldn't afford a few years ago when I asked for child support adjustments. We walked across the gravel. Chloe, my oldest, scuffed her shiny shoes. Mark, my youngest, held my hand too tight. The moment we walked through the huge oak doors, the air changed. It was colder inside, pumped full of recycled air-conditioned air and the heavy smell of mothballs and lilies from the altar. I kept my head down. I didn't want to see anyone, especially David, especially Sarah. We found our usual spot, third pew from the back, far right, near the fire exit. Safety and anonymity. I slid into the seat. The wood felt hard against my tailbone. I pulled out a hymnal, pretending to read the index. Then, I looked up. There he was, David. Center section, 4th row. He was wearing his light gray suit, the expensive one. His new wife, Beth, was beside him, beaming, her hair perfectly coiffed. The 2 stepchildren, a girl with huge bows and a boy in a tiny vest, were seated on either side of David. He had his massive arm slung casually over the back of the pew, resting near the girl's shoulder. The picture of patriarchal perfection. Super dad. He looked over his shoulder. Our eyes met. David didn't flinch. He just gave me the practiced, tight-lipped little half-smile he always reserved for me. The The smile that said, "Look at me. Look how well I've done without you. Look at my better life." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked down quickly at the hymnal. My hands were shaking again. He doesn't know. He couldn't possibly know. If Sarah had told Pastor Tom, Tom would have had to address David directly before the service. Or maybe not. Maybe Tom was waiting for the platform. The lights dimmed slightly. The organ began its slow, heavy groan. It was the call to worship. Pastor Tom walked onto the stage. He was a stocky man, usually radiating booming confidence. Today, he looked pale. His movements were slow. He adjusted the microphone twice. Next to him, seated in the front pew, was Sarah. Sarah. She was wearing a cream-colored linen suit. Her face was a mask of stone. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't interacting with the people around her. She was staring straight ahead at the choir loft, but her focus was elsewhere. She was waiting. I watched her breathing. Shallow. Fast. She knew. She was the fuse. The service began. The opening prayer was standard. Bless the fellowship. Bless the week ahead. We sang a hymn about salvation. David's deep baritone was loud, deliberately carrying over the congregation, projecting righteousness. Liar. The children's moment came. Pastor Tom gathered all the little kids up front. David made sure his 2 stepchildren were front and center. My boys stayed glued to my side. Tom talked about sharing and loving your neighbor. David watched them with a benevolent, sickening gaze. Then, the offering. The ushers passed the plates. David made a big show of pulling out a $100 bill and letting the plate pass slowly so everyone could see his generosity. It was always a show. Finally, the sermon time. Pastor Tom walked back to the pulpit. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, church," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "This week," he continued, "I had prepared a sermon about forgiveness, about the boundless nature of grace. A wonderful, easy message to preach." He paused. He didn't look at his notes. He looked out over the sea of faces, his eyes scanning the crowd. They stopped briefly, right over David's head, before snapping back to the center aisle. "But this morning," Pastor Tom said, the microphone catching the subtle crack in his voice, "the Holy Spirit impressed upon me that we need a different message, a harder message." A ripple went through the congregation. This was unusual. Tom was meticulous about his schedule. David shifted slightly in his seat. I saw Beth lean in and whisper something to him. He shook his head, annoyed. He hated disruptions to the schedule, especially disruptions that pulled focus from his performance. Tom opened his large leather-bound Bible. He didn't look at the printed text on the page. "We are going to talk about integrity," he stated. "We are going to talk about performance." The word performance landed like a small stone hitting glass. "Many of you know that I believe in the power of this sanctuary," Tom said. "I believe that when you walk through those doors, you should feel the love of God. You should feel seen. You should feel safe." He leaned into the pulpit. His face was serious, etched with something that looked like sorrow, not anger. "But what happens when the love stops at the door?" he asked the room. "What happens when our faith is merely a costume we wear for an hour and a half on Sunday mornings?" He started to walk the stage, pulling the microphone cord with him. He was moving, kinetic, searching for the right words. "We talk about stewardship," Tom continued, his voice rising now. "We talk about managing the gifts God has given us. We talk about money, yes. We talk about time, but we rarely talk about the stewardship of presence." He stopped directly in front of Sarah. Sarah did not move. "You can write a massive check," Tom said, his eyes blazing now, "and that check can be seen by every person in this room. You can stand here and sing louder than anyone, proclaiming your love for the Lord, but if you walk out of here and abandon the sacred trusts placed in your care, the vulnerable, the dependent, the children who bear your name, your performance is worthless." The silence in the church became heavy, suffocating. People were shifting, looking around. They knew something was wrong. This wasn't abstract. This was pointed. "We are very good at acting the part of the devoted parent," Tom pressed on. "We rush to buy the new toys. We splurge on the expensive gadgets. We buy the happiness we think we deserve. but we buy it for the audience we are currently playing to." David froze. I watched the back of his neck tighten. He hadn't moved a muscle since Tom mentioned stewardship of presence. "Let me ask you, brother." Tom didn't name names, but his eyes were now fixed generally in David's direction. "When you walk through the aisles of the world, when you are not under the bright lights of this sanctuary, who are you shopping for? Who are you seeing? And perhaps more importantly, who are you ignoring?" My breath hitched. It was the word ignoring. That was the exact action Sarah had witnessed. Tom pounded the pulpit once. A solid, shocking sound. "You can purchase every plastic toy known to man. You can buy the biggest, flashiest gift for the child that validates your current narrative. But if you stand in the middle of that store, in that crowded aisle, and you tell the child who actually shares your blood, the child who needs your time and attention, that you are busy, or don't have time for this right now, God sees that receipt." The church was completely still. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning struggling against the heat outside. Tom walked back to the center. He didn't yell. He sounded heartbroken. "We cannot prioritize the performance over the reality," he pleaded. "We cannot use our resources, our money, our time, our energy, to curry favor with the people we want to impress, while neglecting the essential, messy, inconvenient responsibilities we already carry." He paused, taking a slow, painful drink of water. "It is easy to be super dad," Tom said, echoing the title David loved to embody. "It is easy to buy love with a new bicycle or a video game console. But when the children you are responsible for, the children whose existence you signed up for, are standing right there, feeling small, feeling unseen, feeling ignored, the price of that plastic toy is measured in the currency of your soul." I felt hot tears prick my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were a sudden cleansing rush of venomous relief. Someone saw it. Someone said it. I risked a look at David. He wasn't moving. Beth was pale, fiddling with the silver cross around her neck. She looked confused, maybe defensively angry. She didn't understand the context, but she knew the focus had shifted directly onto her husband. David's face was white. He was sweating, a bead of perspiration tracking a path down his temple and into the perfect collar of his expensive suit. His jaw was locked. He refused to look at Tom. He refused to look at the congregation. He stared straight ahead at the choir loft, his eyes vacant. He was caught. Tom closed his Bible. Slowly, the heavy thump echoed. "God requires truth in the inward parts," he murmured. "And the aisle of Target is as much a pulpit as this stage is. Who are you when the audience is gone? Who are you when the cashier is the only witness?" He didn't offer a concluding prayer. He just stood there for a long, terrible moment, letting the silence crush the room. Then he nodded to the pianist. "Let us close with hymn 345, A Mighty Fortress is Our God." The piano struck the first note. The congregation began to sing, but the sound was thin, fractured. Everyone was looking around, trying to figure out who the message was for. I knew. Sarah knew. Tom knew. David knew. The moment the final chorus ended, the organ cut off abruptly. Tom gave a brief, perfunctory benediction, not making eye contact with anyone. "Go in peace." And then, the rush. The church doors burst open as people bolted for the fresh air. I stayed seated. I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, fused to the floor. I watched David. He was moving fast, pushing his way past the elderly couples. He didn't look at Beth or the stepchildren. He didn't stop to shake Tom's hand, which was mandatory for his super dad image. He was fleeing. His perfectly coiffed hair was slightly messy, sticking to the sweat on his forehead. He was gone in a flash, disappearing through the heavy oak doors, abandoning his post, abandoning his current family. The new Mrs. David, Beth, stood up slowly. She looked lost, scanning the room for him. She looked back at me, 3 rows behind her, catching my eye. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held her gaze. It was a cold, hard stare, devoid of pity. I hadn't moved an inch. She didn't ask me where he went. She didn't have to. She knew exactly where he went, running from the truth. I watched her gather the stepchildren, their faces confused and disappointed. They looked small now, their fancy clothes suddenly too loud. I finally managed to stand. The blood rushed to my head. I felt dizzy. I guided my kids out of the pew. As we walked down the side aisle, past the altar where the lilies drooped slightly in the heat, I saw Sarah. She was standing near the back, waiting for her husband. She didn't look tired anymore. She looked like a soldier who had just won a miserable battle. Our eyes met one last time. She didn't say anything. She just gave me the faintest, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement. I saw him. I told him, "It is done." I walked past her, out into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The humidity hit me like a physical punch. We got in the car. Chloe and Mark were silent, sensing the tectonic shift in the atmosphere. I started the engine. The car roared to life. I pulled out of the parking lot, back onto Elm Street. We passed David's parked SUV in the front lot. It was still there, empty. He hadn't even taken his car. He must have parked down the street. Maybe he ran all the way home. I drove the 6 blocks back to my house. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. Silence. "Mom," Chloe whispered from the back seat. "Are we going to get ice cream?" "No," I said, putting the car in park. My voice was flat. I got out. The gravel crunched under my polished shoes. I opened the back door for the kids. We walked into the house. The cool air inside felt sterile. The coffee stain was still there above the baseboard. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out. Unknown number. I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds. Then I answered. "Hello?" It was David. His voice was a rasp, raw with panic. "Kristen, listen to me." He gasped. "You have to call Tom. You have to tell him it was a mistake. Tell him I was sick. Tell him I left early. I need you to fix this." I walked over to the kitchen counter. I picked up a dirty water glass and set it down hard. "Why would I do that, David?" I asked. My voice was calm, too calm. "Because if I lose this church," he spat, "if I lose my reputation, you know what happens next, right? You know what I'll take from you." I closed my eyes. I didn't have to guess. He would fight for the children again. He would try to make my life hell, just to prove he still had power. I opened my eyes and looked out the kitchen window at the humid, oppressive afternoon sky. The show was over, but the theater was still burning down. "You already lost it," I said, quiet and final. "You bought the wrong ticket." I hung up. I didn't block the number. I put the phone down on the counter. I looked at the stain on the wall, the cheap little scar he left on my life. I walked over to the cleaning cabinet, pulled out the harsh chemicals, and grabbed a sponge. I scrubbed the wall until the paper was almost threadbare. I scrubbed until the stain was gone. Then I stood back. It was clean, but the white paint was slightly thinner now, fragile. I heard the front door slam open downstairs. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, not the children. I grabbed the sponge tighter. "Kristen, open this damn door!" David roared from the hallway. I walked to the bedroom door and slid the deadbolt shut. The first frantic smash of his fist against the wood shook the frame.